So we're to the book of First Ezra.
Or just Ezra, if you take the American approach to the Old Testament.
Yeah.
The American Protestant approach. I don't know what other American groups pick, but yeah, we are in Ezra. Now we're out of the chronicles of the activities of the kings. We spent 4 books on the kings of Israel, and specifically the last one, King of Judah. And we get to Ezra, and this is written after the nations have been dissolved. So Cyrus, at the end of Chronicles, we saw Cyrus took over, and one of his acts is going to be to send people back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. And that's where Ezra comes in, and he's one of the people that goes back. So Ezra chapter 1 recounts the admonition of Cyrus to rebuild the temple. And they gather all sorts of things, and I found verse 9 really interesting, because now all the holy vessels are being restored, and in verse 9 it says, and now this was their number, 30 gold dishes, 1,000 silver dishes, and 29 duplicates.
Mine does not say duplicates, it says censers. Censers.
Interesting. That actually makes more sense, sirs. But so anyway, that was what hit me in chapter 1, and not much else.
Yeah, and it's confusing because of the way names are used.
Yes,
and now this is the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, and then it says Cyrus the king also brought out the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had taken, and then it says all these did Sheshbazzar bring up. That's just weird. I don't understand who Sheshbazzar is.
Oh, Sheshbazzar is a prince of Judah. Verse 8 explains that. So Cyrus brings the things out to Mithredath and Sheshbazzar.
And it's interesting, Sheshbazzar is not, as far as I understand, a Jewish name. So just interesting how now he's, this guy at least is referred to by his Persian name.
Right. So chapter 2, we have a list of the people who agree to go with Ezra to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, and that covers all the way through about verse 60 of chapter 2. And I noted verse 59, now these are those who came from Telmelah, Telharsha, Cherub, Aden, and Immer, but they were not able to give evidence of their fathers' households and their descendants, whether they were of Israel. And then again in verse 62, another group of people searched among their ancestral registration, but they could not be located. Therefore, they were considered unclean and excluded from the priesthood. This harkens back to one of the things we talked about in First Chronicles, and even going up until the time of Christ, that the Israelites kept very good track of who was in what family and what tribe.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I like 63. The governor told them that they were not to partake of the most holy food, this bread of the presence or any of these offerings, until there should be a priest to consult Urim and Thummim. This thing that we don't really understand what it is. We have some vague ideas of what Urim and Thummim are, but it seems like there's some sort of wooden dice that you roll, and somehow they get a decision out of that. But I just think it's interesting the way that that's given as the word of God.
Right.
I guess at least for these specific Urim and Thummim. And it's unclear to me if they've had the same Urim and Thummim throughout or at some point, because it's not kept track of, like they say in the Ark of the Covenant, they've grabbed the same tablets that Moses wrote.
Right. God wrote them.
Yeah.
Just Moses brought them down.
Right. But well, I think God wrote the first one, and Moses.
Okay, we don't have to debate that now, but we could look it up.
But anyways, they never talk about the Urim and Thummim, and I think that's interesting because they just always say, like, and then we'll make the decision based off the Urim and Thummim. And they never explain what is that, or how did they decide that that's a godly thing, or, are they keeping the same ones from the time of Moses?
So chapter 3, they've built an altar, and I think it's interesting in verse 3, they set up the altar on its foundation, and they were terrified because of the peoples of the land, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord. So they're terrified of the people of the land rather than being confident that God is going to take care of them.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because it's like Cyrus is the king over the area, right?
Yep.
And he is like the one in charge of telling them that they're allowed to do this. They have a note from the king saying, we're allowed to do this, and they're still afraid of the people of the land.
Yeah. So the temple is being restored, and I like verse 11, chapter 3. They sang, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, saying, for he is good, for his loving kindness is upon Israel forever. And all the people shouted with a great shout, when they praised the Lord because of the foundation of the house of the Lord. Mm-hmm. Yet, many of the priests and Levites and heads of fathers' households, the old men who had seen the first temple, wept with a loud voice when the foundations of this house was laid before them. Because, we actually find this out later, but the reason is because the rebuilt temple is not going to be as magnificent as the original temple.
Yeah.
Interesting, the size of it. It comes in, and they said it was 60 by 60, 60 cubits by 60 cubits. And we remember the size of the original temple was 60 cubits by 20 cubits. Mm-hmm. What that means and how it works out, I don't know.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's puts into some perspective the way that, or the passage of time that, now it's still time where people have seen the old temple and they're seeing the new one and they're like, wow, this is not great.
Yeah.
And it even says, so the people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shout from the sound of the people's weeping. So it's a fair number of people that have seen the old temple and now they're looking at the new one and they're saying, well, like, this is so terrible. This is the way we're honoring our God.
Yeah. Which points out an interesting dilemma we face in all of mankind. The things which bring some people joy bring others sadness.
Mm-hmm. And it is difficult because it is like a joyful thing that the temple is built. It is a joyful thing that now we can worship God in his temple again. But, well, not us, not we, but,
right.
For them, that's what they're thinking. But then it's also a sad thing because it's not the way that it was before. It's not worship in the temple in your own country with your own king. To be fair, the own king part also not great.
Right.
That's what God says. Like, you don't really actually want a king. God says that he's a good enough of a leader that you should be happy with that. But
so the temple is being restored, but then we get to chapter 4, and what we see is that there are people that want to hinder the work. Interesting the way they said it. The people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and frightened them from building. They hired counselors against them to frustrate their counsel in all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia. And then they're going to write a letter to King Artaxerxes. So we've switched from Cyrus to Artaxerxes to, and they're going to try to get Artaxerxes to stop the building of the temple. And they say, these people, once they get the temple, they're great people and they're going to rebel against you and you're going to lose your tax income. And I found it interesting that when they write the letter, they include the rest of the nations which the great and honorable Osnappar deported and settled in the city of Samaria. The great and honorable Osnappar. Mm-hmm. Just, I've never heard of Osnappar before other than this text.
Right.
Great and honorable. And so they send a letter to King Artaxerxes, and they make accusations that they're going to lose, that Artaxerxes is going to lose his income from them, and they're going to rebel. Which results in the king coming, saying, stop the work.
Right. I think it's interesting, verse 11 of chapter 4. This is a copy of the letter that they sent to Artaxerxes the king. And then it's the letter, right? I don't consider myself the type of person who goes into libraries and reads letters from kings to random groups of people that they're reigning over.
Right.
And in this case, it's a little bit different because it's in a collection of other works, or even within the book of Ezra, it's within a collection of, like, here's the story of, how are we rebuilding Jerusalem, or how are we rebuilding the temple? What are we doing here as the people of Israel, the remnant tribe?
Right.
So it is a little bit different than that, but I just thought of that, a couple different times in this book. We have this, the same sort of writing. This is a copy of the letter sent. And I just thought it was interesting because I guess it's easy to conceptualize. Maybe sometimes it's easy to conceptualize, like, oh, I'm reading this and it was written a long time ago. And okay, we read Genesis and that was written a long time ago, or whatever. But it's different when it's, now I'm reading Ezra. Ezra was written a long time ago. And before that, they wrote this letter, and Ezra thought, we'll just write in that into our letter.
So that, they do. And there's going to be an interesting dilemma here, because in chapter 4, verse 11, they write the letter to King Artaxerxes. And in chapter 4, verse 24, the work was stopped until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So, actually, what that means is that you had Cyrus, and then you had Artaxerxes, and we don't know how long he reigned, and then you have Darius, who is now the king. And two prophets come up in chapter 5, verse 1, Haggai and Zechariah.
Yeah.
And they, in turn, challenge the people to start going to the work, to redoing the temple, and they start working on it. But then they write another letter is written, this time to Darius the king, and in that letter they ask, did not Cyrus make it okay for us to build this? And speaking of letters that are stored, so someplace in the records of Cyrus, they kept this proclamation that the people can go to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And so as a result of that, Darius issues a decree in chapter 6 that they should read the archives, and he issues a decree that they can rebuild the temple.
Yeah.
And let's see, I went to chapter 6, verse 11. Darius issued a decree that any man who violates this edict, a timber shall be drawn from his house, and he shall be impaled on it, and his house shall be made a refuse heap on account of this. Yeah. Anybody who stood against the rebuilding of the temple was subject to death.
And death in a weird way, too. We have houses that are way different than what they had, but take the supporting beam out of your house, so now it's going to fall down, and now we're going to impale you on it.
Yep.
When we, in modern American, it's easy to think of somebody being impaled on a beam and think of that as like a crucifixion, but I'm not sure that that's what this was. It could have just been, we're just going to sharpen this beam and then, stick your body through it.
Right.
Somehow.
Thrust it through your belly, as we've seen a number of people have died that way with spears.
It is interesting. Mine says, his house shall be made a dunghill. And I think that's a funnier way to write it than yours says refuse heap, right?
Right.
So mine says that not, I don't know that it says it a few times in Ezra, but over the time that we've been reading, it said it a few times. Okay, we're going to make you into a dunghill. Or,
right. And that's an indication of consistency in the translators.
Yeah.
That they've just chosen probably for the same Hebrew word.
Yeah.
So
it's a funny English word. So
it is.
I just like it. Not that I want my house, I don't want my house to become a dunghill.
Right. You don't want it to smell like a dunghill either.
Yeah, exactly.
Some people like dung beetles, though. Who knows?
Yeah.
In chapter 6, so Darius tells them they can rebuild the temple, and then they complete it in chapter 6. And then they celebrate. They celebrate what? They dedicate the temple, and then they celebrate?
Yeah, they celebrate Passover.
The Passover. Because the Passover is always a very important festival for Israel, along with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I noticed that when they offer offerings now, as opposed to thousands of bulls and rams and lambs, they're offering 100 and 200 and 400.
That's definitely, now the house of Israel is no longer 1 million people strong with lots of shepherds, but they're this remnant who, they no longer have one formal leader among them. They are just this group of people who happen to live in the area and, happen to have this God that's powerful, right?
Yep.
And they don't have anything to their name. They've been almost wiped out in that sort of way.
Yep.
But I like it. Darius is, part of the reason he says that they can rebuild their altar. I think it's interesting. In verse 10, he says that they may offer pleasing sacrifices to the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and his sons. So he has some idea, either he has some idea that, the God of Israel is powerful, or he's just willing to say, I don't know which God is powerful, but one of them has to be. So I'll let those people go, and I'll let, each people can go build their own gods, and if they all pray for me, then things are going to go well.
Yeah. Interesting that verse it is a footnote in the New American Standard that from acceptable sacrifices, the footnote says sweet smelling sacrifices.
Interesting.
A sweet aroma to God. So they celebrate the Passover, and in chapter 7, verse 10, is one of the most preachable passages in the book of Ezra, and it just describes Ezra, who had set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to practice it and to teach his statutes and ordinances in Israel. Yeah. So it is an easy 3-point message. Study the law, practice it, and teach it. Something that every believer ought to be doing for their children.
Yeah. I find it interesting. I would not have been able to tell you that Ezra was a direct descendant from Aaron before reading this today. I just didn't. I never thought of it. I never considered it. Maybe that means the last time I read Ezra, I wasn't that attentive to the genealogies, or just it wasn't something that was set in my heart or whatever.
Don't let it bother you. Most people aren't very attentive to the genealogies.
But I found that interesting, and I also found it interesting. I knew when I started reading that this was 10 chapters long, and Ezra's not mentioned until chapter 7, and I just find that interesting. Ezra's first mentioned, as far as I could tell, right at the beginning of chapter 7. Now, in the reign of Artaxerxes, Ezra, and they list off who he's, come down in the line from. Son of Eleazar, son of Aaron.
So by the time Ezra comes, the temple's already restored.
Right.
Which is interesting, because we often think, well, Ezra had a big hand in it. No, what he did is he had a hand in re-educating the people of Israel about the law, which he had studied and practiced. As a matter of fact, I think Artaxerxes tells Ezra or Darius, one of them tells them that tells Ezra that he should teach the people.
Yeah, it's interesting. This says in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, and during the reign of Darius, the temple's finished. And the thing is, it's confusing because it seems like the way this is written, there's King Cyrus, and then King Artaxerxes, and then King Darius, and then King Artaxerxes again.
Right.
It is just a little bit unclear the way the names are used, the way the names are Now it's probably some of these names are translated into Hebrew and then now back into English, and some of these sort of line up with other modern histories that we have. Now the Persia is keeping
Right.
more records too, and so now we have the records of Persia that we're comparing Ezra to, and there are multiple Artaxerxes. So I think this is the second Artaxerxes, but I don't know for sure. Do you happen to know?
No, I don't.
Okay. So it's possible that this is before the temple is built, but it's also possible that it's Artaxerxes after Darius is dead.
Right. So Ezra goes, and he's going to teach people, and the king's kindness in verse 27. Trying to make sure I know who's speaking here. This is the king telling Ezra, according to the wisdom of your God, which is in your hand, appoint people, and whoever will not observe, they should be punished. And then he says, blessed be the Lord, the God of our fathers, who has put such a thing as this in the king's heart. This must be Ezra speaking, to adorn the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem, and has extended loving kindness to me before the king and his counselors, before all the king's mighty princes. Thus I was strengthened according to the hand of the Lord my God upon me, and I gathered leading men from Israel to go up with me. Again, it's like we flipped back, and he's not in Israel now.
And this is an interesting part, just because now we're reading Ezra, and he's just describing his own experience. And
Right.
that goes through chapter 8, and then it doesn't keep going on that way.
And in chapter 8, Ezra is going to send for Levites, and he says, according to the good hand of our God upon us, they brought us a man of insight of the sons of Mali, the son of Levi, the son of Israel, and his brothers. So according to the good hand of our God. I used to kind of like that. The good hand of God has blessed us and arranged it so we get these Levites to come.
I do. Verse 16 I thought was very funny. It's just who Ezra is sending for. He gathers everyone to the river. They camp there 3 days, and he found none of the sons of Levi, so he sends for them. And he sends for Eleazar, Ariel, Shemaiah, Elnathan, Jarib, Elnathan, Nathan, Zechariah, Meshullam, and then also Joyarib and also Elnathan. It's funny that Elnathan is mentioned 3 different times, presumably 3 different people named Elnathan.
Right.
And then also a guy named Nathan. The poor naming scheme that these people had, where everyone's named the same thing, makes it hard to identify people if that's what names are for.
And I like the way that what he says at the end of that. He brought all these guys, teachers,
Yeah.
with the intent being that they're going to teach the law of the Lord. In the middle of chapter 8, they have a fast, and they humble themselves before the Lord, and they ask that God would protect them. And again, this is Ezra leaving Babylon to go to Jerusalem. And it says in this section that he didn't want to ask the king for protection along the way, because he had talked about how great God was and how mighty God was, and so he figured that the king would think, well, your God must not be that strong if he can't protect you along the way. So they prayed for protection. They sought and they fasted and sought God concerning the matter. He listened to their entreaty, and so he journeyed, and they came to Jerusalem and remained there.
What does your verse 22 say? Mine says, "For I was ashamed to ask the king."
Yep, I was ashamed to request from the king troops. And he delivered us from the hand of the enemy and the ambushes by the way. Verse 31. So they get to Jerusalem. They place the treasure into the temple, and then they start reading the book of the law.
Yeah.
And we end up in chapter 9, which for me is one of the more troubling, probably, chapters of the Bible.
Yeah.
This is a chapter where Ezra discovers that the people of Israel have taken wives from the people in the land, which they had specifically been told not to. And it says that he finds out that they've been unfaithful and that the rulers have been the most unfaithful.
Yeah.
And so when Ezra hears this, he tore his garment and his robe and pulled some of the hair from his head and his beard, and he sat down appalled.
Yeah.
So here's the issue for Ezra chapter 9. The Israelites have been in the land, and they have absorbed and melded with the people of the land, and thereby they have walked away from their God. And chapter 9 is going to actually call the people to get rid of their wives. So in 9, no, this is chapter 8. I skipped this. I'm sorry. That's okay. We can go on. I covered the things in chapter 8.
Okay.
So in chapter 9, verse 3, I just mentioned that, where he sits down appalled. And
I think that's interesting. Before chapter 9, verse 3, chapter 9, verse 3 says, "As soon as I heard this, I tore my garment and my cloak and pulled my hair from my head and from my beard and sat appalled." Before this, I thought Ezra was a clean-shaven man. That's the way I imagined him. And so
Okay.
It was just a funny paradigm shift of like, I don't know who this guy is or what he looks like. And I know some of his like, not descendants, but the opposite of that, kinsmen, I guess, that are the people that were before him, his fathers and his fathers' fathers. But that's basically all I know about him. Is he likes to study the law, he wants to do it and teach it, and he's a Levite, and now suddenly he has a beard. And I just thought that was funny, just the way that I could have certain perspectives or thoughts about things, biases or whatever, and have it be suddenly shaken when he's tearing apart his beard because he's so upset.
Yeah. And it says he was appalled until the evening offering, and he arose from his humiliation, which that humiliation comes from tearing his garment and pulling out his hair and his beard. And he stretches out his hands to God and says, "I am ashamed, I'm embarrassed to lift up my face to you, for our iniquities have risen above our heads, and our guilt has grown even to the heavens. We've been disobedient. We have done what we should not have done." But
verse 8, "But now for a brief moment favor has been shown by the Lord our God, to leave us a remnant and to give us a secure hold within his holy place, that our God may brighten our eyes and grant us a little reviving in our slavery." This prayer from Ezra is very powerful, but it's, he has these ideas. Our iniquities have been piled up higher than our shoulders, higher than we could ever hope to dig ourselves out. And yet, even among that, God is showing favor among us. For, we talked about it before, the other people, when the temple's rebuilt, right? The young people are celebrating, they're happy, and the older people are weeping because it's not as good of a temple, right? But now, Ezra is thanking God for allowing a remnant of Israel to be alive still. And you can imagine David would be weeping that that's what the kingdom of Israel had come to. Just this powerful idea, even as it's encased in Ezra's prayer. Obviously, having just a remnant of a kingdom isn't great, and Ezra is saying that. But he's also saying we've been blessed to even have a remnant,
right?
Because we've been so evil, we shouldn't even be around anymore.
And following along with that, in verse 13, he says, "After all that has come upon us for our evil deeds and our great guilt, since you, our God, have requited us less than requited us less than our iniquities deserve." We haven't gotten all the punishment that we deserve.
Yeah.
That's a powerful thought, and one which we ought to probably keep in our minds, that God has not charged us with all of our iniquities.
And that's the balance, right? Is God is a just God who will visit the iniquities on the transgressors, but he's also this forgiving and loving God who it seems like doesn't always punish as much as the iniquities deserve, just because he loves.
Right, because he's a forgiving God.
Yeah.
And in chapter 10, they're going to work towards reconciliation, and the reconciliation comes when the mixed marriages, the Israelites put out their non-Hebrew spouses. Some of them had kids. And so they assemble together, and they're going to agree together that it was time for them to deal with this in a way which seems unusual and potentially cruel to us.
Yeah.
I like in verse 9, it said that they all gathered together, and they were trembling because of this matter, that is the mixed marriages and the heavy rain.
Right. Yeah, and he says to them, like, you got to do something about this. And they say, but we can't. It's raining so hard.
Yeah.
Like, do you really expect us to fix this right now in the middle of this rain?
So, verse 11, Ezra says, make confession to the Lord God of your fathers and do his will. Separate yourself from the peoples of the land and from the foreign wives. And all the assembly replied with a loud voice, that's right. As you have said, so it is our duty to do.
Yeah, but the people are many, and it is a time of heavy rain. We cannot stand in the open. Nor is this a task for 1 day or for 2, for we have greatly transgressed in this matter.
Yeah.
And at the end of the, starting in verse 18, for the next 30 verses, all the way to verse 44, it's just a list of people who have transgressed in this matter. So it's not a short list, right?
Yep, because it ends with all these had married foreign wives, and some of them had wives by whom they had children.
Yeah.
That's the way Ezra ends. These are the people have come together to rebuild the temple, and they're called to account for marrying foreign wives. And I guess that's one of the reasons that I kind of have this big question mark at the end of Ezra. And my expectation coming into the book of Ezra, even though I had read it before, I probably didn't focus in as much as I did this time, in part because there is a big difference between reading it. Typically, when you read through the Bible, you read a couple chapters at a time.
Yeah.
You don't read 10 chapters and absorb it together. I think it's a great exercise we're on, reading a book of the Bible each day, although I'm still a little concerned about the 150 chapters in Psalms. I'm concerned just about Psalm 119, getting through it in a day. But I guess I came with an expectation reading Ezra that since it's been said that Ezra was the one who wrote down 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and probably wrote the Pentateuch, and we come to his book, and I thought, okay, there was one good verse there. Chapter 7, verse 10, talking about who Ezra was, and maybe it's going to set up, it's part of what's going to happen is I think Ezra comes up again in Nehemiah.
Right.
But the book of Ezra itself, to me, was probably because of the way it ended, was a little bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, and Ezra as a person feels very unremarkable. I mean, he seems like a guy who follows God and loves him very much, but he's no Moses, right? He's not separating the Red Sea. He's not bringing down 10 plagues. He's not leading, 600,000 men out of Egypt and through the wilderness. He's not an Elijah who's, raising people from the dead.
And an axe from
Yeah. Yeah.
But the one thing that you can say for Ezra is he comes in, the temple's already been rebuilt, and he comes in and he says, you know what? I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to challenge the nation because of this specific sin that impacts a lot of people. A lot of times when we want to address sin, we want to address the sin of one or two people.
Yeah.
Typically, we want to address the sins that we haven't committed. But Ezra comes in, and in that sense, he is a powerful leader because he somehow convinces these people to leave their foreign wives in favor of following the Lord their God.
Yeah, he must have been a very convincing teacher.
Yes.
For sure, because he comes in and teaches the law, and everyone is like, wow, this is exactly what the law says.
Yep. It is
and,
our,
and
it's
it
our
is,
duty.
you
It's
know,
our
having
duty.
read it in the last
Yeah.
couple of weeks, it is what the law says.
Yep.
You shouldn't be intermarrying.
Yeah. So even though personally I found Ezra a little bit disappointing in some of its conclusions, when I think about Ezra from chapter 7 on, when he gets there and how he gets there and his prayers and the impact upon the people of Israel, it was pretty significant.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I ended with the reading of Ezra.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how I felt too. It felt like I was expecting something big also, and then it kind of was a little bit of a splat. There's not much that happens, and even the intermarriage stuff is just confusing, and it feels like something that's gone away with the new covenant, right?
Right.
And
Yeah, because once...
well, gone away in parts, you know, still. The idea is, if you're a Christian, if you're believing in God, you should be married to someone who believes in God.
Yes.
Because otherwise you're going to turn away from God, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah, at the heart of this is the issue of being unequally yoked, which comes up in the New Testament.
Yeah. And it's hard, too, because it feels so enveloped in their race as Israelites.
Right.
And so it feels like they're being racist towards all the people of the land, and it's not about their race. You know, they're probably people of similar color. They probably speak all the same languages. You know, it's hard to get married to someone who doesn't speak your language.
Right.
They probably have a lot of cultural similarities, but just different gods, and that's the heart of the issue, right? Because it seems like people are allowed to join in. You know, that's the story of Ruth. Ruth is allowed to come in to Israel, and it's not counted against Boaz for marrying her because she's a person of the land. It's counted for Ruth for turning away from her foreign gods to be with the God of Israel. And so I wonder, you know, a lot of these people, you know, these are all the people who their wives are not turning away from their foreign gods, right?
Right.
And it's just not said so directly, it seems.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't have anything else about Ezra.
All right. That brings us to the end of the book of Ezra, and tomorrow we get to talk about the second shortest person in the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Yep, Nehemiah.
Yep. And eventually we'll tell you who the shortest person in the Bible is.
Yep. So we'll see you tomorrow for Second Ezra.